returned to a place people rarely come back to, a town that remembers only debts, blood, and silence. Sometimes a place waits for a person longer than the person is ready to admit. Sometimes the land does not forget footsteps, even when they vanished 10 years ago. He did not yet know this town would take his peace a second time. She did not yet know she would choose to stay here, and neither of them knew that silence would soon demand its price. Dust already hung in the air before the train came to a full stop. It drifted low and dry, clinging to the platform as if the ground itself had exhaled in anticipation. Pinedale looked unchanged by time. The same sunburned buildings stood along the narrow street, their wood bleached pale and split by heat. Roofs sagged slightly under years of wind and neglect. Windows watched without curiosity. This was a town that did not greet newcomers. It measured them in silence and remembered what it learned. Thomas Gray stepped down from the train with controlled care, his boots meeting the platform as if he had rehearsed the movement. His body carried habits shaped by old injuries and long endurance. He moved like a man who knew where pain lived and how to keep it quiet. The weight in his shoulders did not come from the small satchel he carried, but from years he had never fully left behind. The air smelled of dust, iron, and something older. It settled in his lungs the way memory did, without asking. He had not returned for comfort. There was no longing tied to this place, no warmth waiting for him at the end of the street. The land left to him by his father was the only reason he stood there now, a narrow stretch of earth beyond the town line, dry and stubborn, bordered by mesquite and stone. It was not valuable in the way men usually meant, but it was his. It was the last thread connecting him to a past he had tried to cut away cleanly and failed. Pinedale seemed to recognize him, even if no one said his name. A few men paused in their work long enough to watch him pass. No one waved, no one approached. The town accepted his presence with the same indifference it offered everything else. Thomas walked the length of the platform and stepped onto the main road, dust rising around his boots. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the ground itself resisted his return. The house on the edge of town waited the way it always had. Its boards were darkened by sun and age, the porch leaning slightly forward as though tired of standing. The roof bore old scars from storms long gone. Thomas stood there for a moment before unlocking the door, taking in the quiet. Nothing inside had changed because nothing inside had been touched. The silence was thick, settled, patient. He set his bag down and let the door close behind him, shutting out the sound of the town. Later that same day, another arrival went almost unnoticed. A woman stepped from a freight wagon near the grain warehouse, her movements precise and restrained. Lydia Moore carried herself with the awareness of someone accustomed to being observed. Her dress was plain, her hat pulled low, her belongings few. She did not linger in the street. She took note of her surroundings without inviting attention, already understanding that visibility in places like this came with cost. She had come by arrangement, hired to keep records for the grain storage and assist with schooling where needed. It was practical work, necessary but rarely appreciated. Lydia accepted that without complaint. She had learned long ago that usefulness was safer than curiosity. As she walked toward the small room prepared for her behind the warehouse office, she felt the town close around her, not hostile but alert. Pinedale revealed itself slowly to her. The rhythm of the place was built on repetition. Wagons came and went. Bells marked the hours. Men spoke when required and fell silent just as easily. Lydia observed patterns rather than faces. She noticed which doors stayed locked, which men avoided each other's eyes, which paths were taken only after dark. She kept these observations to herself, storing them quietly, the way she kept everything important. Thomas saw her first from a distance near the well, though he did not know her name. She stood apart from the others, waiting with a stillness that did not ask permission. There was nothing familiar about her, yet something about the way she held herself suggested understanding, not of him, but of places like this. Their eyes did not meet then, they did not need to. As evening settled, the town returned to its muted routine. Lamps flickered to life behind windows. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of dry earth and oil. Thomas sat on the steps of his house, listening to sounds that had once defined his life. Somewhere in town, Lydia unpacked her few belongings, setting them in careful order. Neither of them spoke of the weight they carried. Neither of them expected relief. Pinedale did not announce what it would demand from them. It never did. It only waited, patient and unyielding, certain that time would uncover what men and women tried hardest to keep buried. Life in Pinedale moved at a deliberate pace, measured in routines that rarely changed. Mornings arrived with the creak of wagon wheels and the muted clang of tools. Afternoons stretched long beneath the sun, quiet and watchful. On the surface, nothing appeared urgent, yet beneath that stillness ran a current of restraint, as if the town were holding its breath, careful not to disturb something unstable beneath its feet. Thomas spent his days repairing the old house on the edge of town. He replaced warped boards, reinforced the porch, and patched the roof where it had surrendered to time. His work was steady and solitary. He chose hours when fewer people were around, and paths that kept him out of sight. When others noticed him, they did so briefly, without invitation. Eyes followed him, then turned away. No one asked questions. No one offered help. The distance felt intentional, as though proximity itself carried risk. The house slowly began to take shape again, not into something new, but into something usable. It reflected Thomas's presence the way land reflected weather, quietly and without ceremony. At night, a single lamp burned behind his window, a small sign of life that drew no comment. He did not attend gatherings or linger in town longer than necessary. His return remained acknowledged but unexamined. Lydia moved through Pinedale differently. She watched rather than avoided. Her days were filled with numbers, lists, and careful records, but her attention extended beyond ledgers. She noticed who delivered grain late and who never signed their name. She observed which men entered the warehouse after hours and which ones never did. Certain families carried influence that did not match their means. Certain decisions were made without any official record at all. She learned quickly that law in Pinedale existed more as a suggestion than a boundary. Authority belonged to those with land, money, or memory strong enough to silence questions. Some names were spoken with ease, others were avoided entirely. When such names surfaced by accident, conversations shortened and eyes shifted away. Lydia learned to recognize the difference between ignorance and caution. This town practiced the latter with discipline. Her presence remained tolerated rather than welcomed. She was useful, and usefulness earned space. She kept her head down, her movements precise, her expressions unreadable. People underestimated her attentiveness, mistaking restraint for detachment. She allowed the mistake to stand. Their paths crossed often, though neither sought it. At the well, they drew water at separate ends, careful not to intrude. At the grain warehouse, Thomas passed by as Lydia worked inside, her figure framed by open doors and drifting dust. On the road toward the low hills beyond town, they moved in opposite directions, their shadows stretching long in the late light. Each time, there was recognition without acknowledgement, awareness without expectation. It was not attraction that settled between them, nor curiosity in its usual form. It was familiarity of a quieter kind, the recognition of someone shaped by pressure, by choices made without witnesses. Neither asked for explanation. Both understood that silence, properly kept, was not emptiness but protection. Pinedale observed these crossings with its usual indifference. The town had seen people pass through, seen others return broken or hardened. It did not assign meaning unless forced to. It only waited. As days accumulated, tension remained constant, neither rising nor easing. Small disruptions appeared and vanished without comment. A gate left open, supplies miscounted, a fence repaired twice in the same week. Lydia noted these patterns, filed them away without reaction. Thomas sensed them without naming them, the way one senses weather changing long before clouds gather. Neither of them spoke of the unease that followed them through the streets. Neither tried to name what had yet to take form. In Pinedale, understanding came not from words, but from what was deliberately left unsaid. And both of them had learned long ago that speaking too soon carried its own consequences. The first signs of trouble appeared quietly, almost politely, as if asking not to be noticed. A single sack of grain went missing from the warehouse. No one raised concern. Loss happened. It was easier to accept absence than to question it. A fence along the eastern property line collapsed overnight, its posts split cleanly, not by age, but by force. It was repaired without discussion. Then came the notes, small scraps of paper left where they did not belong. No names, no threats, only reminders that someone was paying attention. Lydia adjusted the way she worked. Her handwriting grew tighter, her columns more precise. She checked every entry twice, then again at the end of the day. Numbers that should have aligned did not. Amounts shifted just enough to escape casual notice. Money moved through the records like water through cracked stone, never pooling long enough to trace. She corrected what she could, marked what she could not, and kept her own separate account in a small notebook she never left behind. She did not accuse, she did not ask. She understood the difference between mistakes and systems built on disappearance. In Pinedale, nothing vanished without permission. If no one searched for the missing, it meant the loss served someone. That knowledge settled into her routine, heavy but clarifying. Thomas felt the change before he could identify it. The air around him grew tighter. Work paused when he approached. Conversations ended early. The distance people had kept since his return became more deliberate, edged with caution rather than indifference. Someone rode past his house at night more than once. Hoofprints appeared where no path ran. He did not follow them. He did not confront anyone. He knew better than to invite attention before understanding its source. The land he worked began to resist him. Tools dulled faster, nails bent, boards split unexpectedly. These were small inconveniences, but they accumulated. He recognized the pattern from another life, another place. Pressure had its own rhythm. It tested first. It waited for reaction. Thomas gave it none. Memories he had buried resurfaced without warning. The reason he had left Pinedale the first time pressed closer now, no longer content to remain unnamed. He sensed that his return had reopened something the town had sealed imperfectly. His presence disrupted balances that depended on absence. Someone had noticed. Someone always did. Lydia received warnings that were never spoken directly. A pause that lingered too long. A look held just a second past courtesy. Work reassigned without explanation. She understood the message without translation. Questions were counted here. Curiosity had limits. Safety lived inside them. She listened. She adjusted her posture, her routes, her hours. but she did not leave. The idea of departure surfaced briefly and passed. Leaving would have confirmed what others suspected, that she was temporary, replaceable, unanchored. Staying carried risk, but it also carried weight. She chose weight. Their paths crossed more often now, though still without words. At the warehouse door, Lydia noticed Thomas examining the lock longer than necessary. At the edge of town, he saw her pause beside a fence that had been repaired too cleanly. They shared no explanation, only awareness. Each recognized the other as someone who noticed fractures before walls collapsed. The town continued its routines. Wagons rolled, supplies arrived and vanished. Children ran through the streets untouched by the tension that shaped the adults around them. On the surface, Pinedale remained unchanged. Beneath it, pressure spread outward from an unseen center, searching for the weakest point. Lydia kept her records immaculate. Thomas kept his movements predictable. Both understood that unpredictability invited correction. The notes appeared once more, then stopped. The fence remained intact. The grain counts stabilized, though the money did not. Someone had adjusted. Someone was watching reactions, not outcomes. Neither of them spoke of leaving. Neither pretended the unease would resolve itself. They had both lived long enough to know that cracks did not close on their own. They widened slowly, invisibly, until something gave way. In Pinedale, trouble did not announce itself with noise or urgency. It revealed itself through absence, through pressure, through the quiet understanding that restraint had limits. Lydia felt those limits approaching. Thomas did as well, and neither stepped back. The fire began after sunset, when the heat of the day had finally loosened its grip on the town. At first, it looked like another ordinary glow on the horizon, the kind that came from lanterns left burning too long, or careless hands near dry wood. Then the light grew taller, louder. The warehouse caught fast, flames climbing its walls as if they had been waiting for permission. Smoke rolled through the street before the alarm bells could finish ringing. Doors opened. People stepped outside and stopped short, measuring distance instead of danger. Some moved toward the fire. Others stayed where they were, watching, calculating what could be lost and what might be gained by staying still. The night swallowed sound unevenly, leaving only the crack of burning beams and the rush of air pulled toward the heat. Inside the warehouse, the fire had already claimed the roof. Burning grain filled the air with a thick, choking smell. Somewhere beyond the smoke, a child had not made it out. The knowledge spread without words. It moved through the crowd as a tightening in the chest, a shared pause before action or retreat. Thomas did not hesitate. He crossed the space between the crowd and the door without looking back. The smoke closed around him immediately, heavy and blinding. The heat pressed down from above, forcing him lower with every step. He moved by memory and instinct, counting his breaths, ignoring the sharp pull in his chest. He did not expect to return. He had already measured that cost and accepted it. Outside, Lydia joined the line without being asked. Buckets moved from hand to hand, filled and emptied in relentless rhythm. Water splashed uselessly against walls already lost, but she kept lifting, kept passing, even as her arms began to shake. Ash settled into her hair and along her sleeves. Her lungs burned, but she did not stop. The fire demanded effort, even when effort could not win. The structure groaned as beams gave way. Sparks rose into the sky and vanished where stars should have been. The night felt sealed shut, airless, as if the town had been placed under glass. People shouted warnings too late. Someone stumbled and fell. Someone else pulled them upright. The bucket line thinned and thickened again as fear shifted through it. Thomas found the boy curled against the far wall, trapped by falling debris. The heat had driven the air thin, but the child was alive. Thomas gathered him with care that cost precious seconds. The weight in his arms was slight, but the path back felt longer than before. Smoke clawed at his throat. His vision narrowed. The roof above him cracked, sending fire downward in a shower of sparks. When he emerged, the crowd surged forward and then back, reacting as one. The boy was pulled from his arms and carried away. Thomas followed more slowly, his balance unsteady, his skin blistered where heat had broken through cloth. He stopped only when the night air finally reached his lungs. Around him, the warehouse collapsed inward, surrendering to the fire completely. By morning, nothing remained but blackened posts and smoking ash. The loss was measured quickly and accepted even faster, too quickly. Accounts of how the fire began shifted depending on who spoke. No one mentioned the speed. No one mentioned the locked door found forced from the outside. But eyes moved differently now. Attention settled on places it had avoided before. Lydia returned to her room after the crowd dispersed, her body exhausted beyond protest. The smell of smoke clung to her clothes. She washed her hands and arms until the water ran clear, then sat without moving for a long time. When she reached for her papers, the space where they should have been was empty. Her satchel lay open on the bed. The records she had kept separate were gone. So were the older pages she never referenced aloud. Nothing else had been disturbed, no money taken, no clothing touched. The message was precise. Someone knew exactly what to remove. Cold replaced the heat in her chest. She searched again, slower this time, hoping she had misplaced them in exhaustion. She had not. The room felt smaller, its walls closer. The fire outside had consumed more than wood and grain. It had cleared space for something else to move freely. Before dawn, she sensed another presence in the town, a familiarity she had worked hard to outpace. The feeling settled into her bones without warning, the same way it had years ago, before she learned to run quietly. Someone from her past had found the trail again. The fire had not been coincidence, it had been signal. Thomas did not sleep that night. He remained near the ruins until the smoke thinned, watching embers fade into gray. Pain spread slowly through his body as the shock wore off. He welcomed it. Pain was measurable. It stayed where it belonged. What unsettled him more was the pattern he could now see clearly. The fire had not been meant only to destroy, it had been meant to expose. By morning, the town moved on with practiced efficiency. Loss was folded into routine. Plans were made to rebuild. Blame was set aside in favor of silence. But something fundamental had shifted. The quiet that returned was not the same one that had been broken. It was sharper, more deliberate. Lydia stepped into the day knowing that what had been taken could not be replaced, only confronted. Thomas watched the smoke lift from the ruins, knowing that the night had drawn a line the town could not erase. The fire was over. The consequences had only begun. The morning carried a weight that had not been there before. Smoke no longer drifted from the ruins, yet the town felt unsettled, as if the fire had burned through something invisible and left the air thinner. Lydia understood that waiting would only return control to those who had never truly lost it. She chose movement over safety. She altered the records carefully, not enough to expose the truth outright, but enough to bend it in a direction that could not be ignored. Figures were shifted, dates misplaced, routes reassigned on paper. The information she passed forward looked flawed at first glance, unreliable, almost careless. It was exactly what those who ruled from the shadows expected to see. They took it eagerly, believing it confirmed their advantage, believing it would tighten their grip. In doing so, they revealed how closely they had been watching her all along. The response came faster than she anticipated. Pressure moved through the town in subtle ways. Supplies were delayed, certain doors closed, familiar faces avoided her eyes. The mechanism that kept the town obedient had been disturbed, and it reacted, as it always did, with quiet force. Thomas did not call a meeting. He did not ask for trust or explain his intentions. He simply stood where people could see him, near the burned warehouse, near the road where work gathered at dawn. His presence drew attention without demanding it. Those who had watched him return in silence now watched him remain. Men and women lingered longer than necessary, pausing in their routines, standing close enough to feel that they were not alone. When the confrontation came, it did not unfold as a public spectacle. It happened in a narrow space between buildings, where movement was limited and retreat obvious. The men sent to enforce order expected resistance to look familiar. They expected fear, negotiation, a clear leader to isolate. Instead, they met stillness, bodies that did not move aside, eyes that did not drop. The violence was brief and unceremonious. Thomas was struck hard enough to stagger him. Blood darkened his shirt, warm against the cold morning air. He stayed upright through force of will rather than strength. That mattered more than the wound itself. Others stepped forward then, not to fight, but to stand. The line held long enough for witnesses to gather, long enough for restraint to become impossible. By the time authority arrived in name, control had already shifted. The altered records Lydia released next no longer needed disguise. The inconsistencies led directly to accounts that could not be explained away. Money trails surfaced, property transfers connected too neatly to disappearances and fires. Names long treated as untouchable were spoken aloud, first in disbelief, then with certainty. Fear changed hands. It did not vanish, but it lost its direction. Those who had relied on it found themselves exposed by the very silence they had cultivated. The town listened to the evidence not with shock, but with recognition. This was not a revelation, it was a confirmation. Thomas recovered slowly, the injury forcing him into stillness he would have otherwise avoided. People came without invitation. They brought food, tools, small repairs made quietly and without gratitude demanded. Lydia watched the movement of the town from a distance, measuring how truth behaved once it was no longer carried alone. What had once been used against them lost its edge. The pasts they had guarded carefully were no longer secrets traded in private. They became context, no longer leverage. The town had learned something about itself that could not be unlearned. The weight of the truth was heavy, but it was evenly shared. By the end of the day, nothing looked restored. Power had not disappeared. It had shifted into the open, where it could be seen and questioned. The town stood altered, uncertain, but awake. And for the first time in many years, silence was not doing the work of lies. Pinedale did not change in a single day. The same sun burned over the same roofs, and the same dust settled along the road each evening. The town did not wake up renewed or cleansed. Nothing dramatic marked the shift, but something essential loosened quietly, without being named. Fear was the first to release its hold. It did not vanish completely, yet it no longer guided every step or controlled what people avoided seeing. Thomas rebuilt the house on the edge of town slowly, working with a patience shaped by years of restraint. Each beam he replaced and each board he set carried the weight of continuity rather than ambition. He did not rush the work. His body dictated the pace, and he followed it without protest. When the house stood solid again and the roof no longer leaked, he opened a small workshop beside it. The place was modest, easy to overlook. Tools were repaired there, metal straightened, broken parts returned to use. People came without ceremony, leaving worn objects behind and returning later. No explanations were required. The exchange remained quiet and dependable. Lydia stayed without turning her decision into an event. She continued working with the children, teaching them steadily, allowing learning to unfold without pressure. The room she taught in felt calm rather than strict. Mistakes were treated as part of the process, not as failures. Outside the classroom, she kept records openly. Numbers were written as they were, without concealment or alteration. The books reflected the town plainly. Some resisted that clarity at first, others found relief in it. Over time, honesty stopped feeling dangerous and became ordinary. They did not move through the town as a pair defined by shared history. Their connection remained understated, shaped by proximity rather than declaration. Their paths crossed naturally, sometimes during work, sometimes in passing. There were no plans spoken aloud and no promises exchanged. What bound them was a shared choice, made separately and upheld daily. They chose not to leave. They chose presence over escape. The town adjusted in small, nearly invisible ways. People lingered longer at the well. Children stayed outside until the light softened. Names that once carried threat were spoken again, losing power through repetition. Places where silence had once served fear no longer held the same authority. Light did not arrive dramatically. It settled gradually, reshaping habits more than appearances. Thomas became part of the town's rhythm without intention. He repaired what others could not, returning things in better condition than he received them. His past remained known, but no longer defined the present. The land his father had left him was worked again, not for profit, but for continuity. Each cleared path and restored fence carried quiet resolve. Lydia's influence extended beyond the classroom without effort. Children carried structure home with them. Parents noticed changes without naming them. The records she kept stopped being a source of anxiety and became a reference point. Transparency endured. Pinedale did not become ideal. Loss remained part of the landscape. Memory did not disappear, but it stopped pressing forward as a warning. The past became context rather than threat. What emerged was not redemption promised by louder stories, but something steadier. There were no declarations of victory. No one claimed the town had been saved. It simply continued, shaped by people who chose not to disappear when staying demanded restraint. Presence replaced fear. Attention replaced avoidance. The story ended without promises, held together by quiet endurance. That was enough. If stories like this resonate with you, stories of silence, choice, and people who do not speak more than necessary, subscribe to the Dust and Devotion Tales channel. Here the stories continue, and they stay with you longer than words.